Well, welcome everybody. I'm glad you could be here. I've heard some complaints about the weather, and in fact, this is, for me, this is quite lovely. It's not snowing and it's not below zero, so really I should have shorts on because that's the rules in Canada, of course. So my name is Vic Tesolin. I work for Veritas. I work in the R&D department, and I work alongside a very, very talented team that does the engineering and the designing of the Veritas tools. I'm the woodworker in the crowd of those people, and so I help them with features and things like that that are important for woodworking tools. I also prevent them from putting lasers on things, which if you leave an engineer unchecked, it will have a laser in some automatic function. So that's part of what I do. So my background is furniture design and making. So I studied at a school called Rosewood Studio in Canada, where I did a furniture design and making program. And then now, because it's somewhat difficult to make a living at bespoke furniture, I have a day job, which is lovely, which means I no longer eat ramen. And then I'm able to do furniture design and making almost as at the hobby level. I make what I want, when I want, how I want, and it's lovely. So if you have any questions at all throughout the presentation, don't try to remember the question. Just go ahead and throw your hand up and ask it. There's no such thing as stupid questions. The stupid question is the one that's not asked. If I don't know the answer, I'll make something up, but it'll sound really convincing. That's also as good as the jokes are going to get. So if you didn't find that all that funny, then yeah, you may want to just grab a biscuit and leave now. Actually, better yet, no, don't grab a biscuit. Yeah. I got the nod from Peter over there. So.
He's a biscuit at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm going to start out just talking a little bit about the company Veritas. So Veritas was started up over 30 years ago by our founder, Mr. Leonard Lee. And basically it was in response to having trouble getting good product for his customers. And so he thought, well, instead of depending on others, I'm going to do my own thing. And so Veritas was born. In order for something to wear the Veritas badge, it has to satisfy two criteria. Number one, it has to have an element of innovation. So we will look at what was done in the past, saw what worked and what didn't work, and then put together a feature set that is going to ultimately make the best tool. A prime example of that is the new combination plane. Has anybody in here ever used a Stanley 45 before? Right, it can be a little bit frustrating trying to set it up. I owned one for a week. I bought it off of eBay. I sharpened up the blades. I tried to make it work. After a half an hour, I put it all back into the box, put it on eBay, and actually made $5. So, so it was quite a good deal. But in that case, the design team, we took a look at all of those old planes, the records, the Stanleys, and we basically pulled out all the features that we thought were important in the existing tool, and then put features in that we thought were important, like micro-adjusting abilities for all the stop features, right? That was one of the most frustrating parts about using a 45, was trying to get everything lined up and then locked into place, and then you found out, oh, you're about a mil off, and then you had to go through the whole process again. So we have a huge tool collection that was started by Mr. Lee and has been continued with our current president, Robin Lee. And so that tool collection helps us because we can draw from that. It's quite a resource for us because we pulled 4 or 5 different combination planes out, and we're able to try them all. Some of them were actually quite dear as far as their rarity and value, but we're encouraged to take a look at them, pull them apart, see how they work, and then try to make things better. So an element of innovation is one of the criteria to getting the Veritas name badge. And then the other one is made in North America, of course. So for us, It's important that we offer a high quality product. And so having it made in North America, with the bulk of it being made right in Ottawa in Canada, which is pretty fantastic. It's not often nowadays that you're seeing North American made product. It's starting to reemerge, but for us it's important that the product that we offer is high quality, and of course you're getting your money's worth out of it. So the process starts with an idea, and a lot of times with a problem. You know, how do you do this? Well, we don't have something that does that, and so we start to take a look at it. The designers start to do drawings, and very quickly we get into the 3D world, which is 3D printing. And so because tools largely are in the hand and being used, it's important for us to be able to say, yes, you know, this feels good, or no, it doesn't feel good. And then even to the point now where we've gotten the ability to do 3D printing in metal, which is called selective laser sintering. And basically they lay down a layer of powder, a laser comes along and fuses the powder together where it needs to be, and then they just layer after layer, they build it up. And the nice thing about that is that we can take a tool and we can actually we can 3D print what would be our casting, and then we can give that casting to the manufacturing department, and then they can go ahead and start to prove out their methods for manufacture, which is nice. So not only does it give us a proper metal tool that you can put a blade in and use and test, but it also is benefiting other departments within manufacturing, right? Once we get it to that stage, then we start doing testing. We do pre-manufacturing runs that allow us to find any faults with the tools. I usually end up with them in my shop for anywhere from a number of weeks to a number of months, where I basically take that new tool and I put it into my normal regime that I would use for woodworking, and then I test it out under real world kind of situations. Once that's done, then we go into production, and then the tool basically becomes available. Of course, it's normally released in North America first, because of course that's where we're at. But then very shortly after that, it comes over to places like the UK, and it's available for purchase. So Veritas distributes in over 24 different countries around the world. The biggest markets around the world being the UK, Australia, Germany are some of our bigger ones. Of course, the Americans as well. We sell to them, but typically they just order. Like, we don't distribute basically to them, but they can just order from us directly because they're so close. So that's Veritas in a nutshell. Are there any questions? No questions? I either explained that really well or you're all lost. Good? All right. Very good. So Peter's asked me to talk a little bit about some particular tools. So I'm going to talk about those. But if you have any questions about other tools, by all means ask. And we'll have some fun with it. So the first tool that I wanted to talk about is the shoulder plane. So the shoulder plane is probably one of the most useful planes, whether or not you're working by hand or by machine or some combination of the two. We've all been down that road where if you're using a machine to establish shoulders for, let's say, a mortise and tenon joint, and you can spend a lot of time messing about with the machine, trying to get it set perfectly so that every cut is perfect, but the problem is that Murphy is a woodworker, and 3 out of the 4 shoulders will be brilliant, the other one is slightly off, right? And I don't know how that happens. I can only just assume that there is some higher power messing with things. And so what I typically do when if I'm using a machine to create shoulders is that I won't spend as much time tuning the machine to an nth of its life, but I get it really close, which cuts your setup time quite a bit. And then when I go to fit the joint, then I'm going to use the shoulder plane in order to get that fit to be just perfect. It's the same situation with the cheeks of the tenon, right? You can sit on a machine for days trying to get it so that you're getting the perfect fit right off of the machine. But the reality is that you can get it, you can set that joint just a little bit fat so that you can pare a little bit of that material away and then get a perfect fit, okay? Again, 3 out of 4 mortises will fit perfectly. The 4th, who knows what happened, right? You sneezed while you were doing it, or something has happened and things have changed a little bit. So in my case, I typically will cut my mortise and tenons by hand. I do use some machines, but I really do enjoy the process of cutting joints by hand. And it's not because I have any romantic notions about it. It's really about I enjoy doing it. And so if you enjoy doing it, if that's the part you like, then that's the part you should do. I'm no longer under any sort of time restraints as far as how fast I have to get a piece done. And so for me, just being able to have an album playing on my record player, because I don't create a lot of dust, so I can actually listen to vinyl in my shop, which is brilliant, right? And again, I'm not an audiophile. I don't have $6 squazillion worth of kit in my shop to listen to records. I like records for the same reason that I like hand tools, because I can pull the album out, I inspect it, I put it on the turntable, I brush the dust off, I drop the needle, and then I have 20 minutes. And that 20 minutes actually helps me decide how long things are taking to do. So when I hear the telltale scratch of the album being over, and I'm halfway done a couple of corners of dovetails, then I know, oh, okay, that took me 20 minutes to do that. A lot of times we overestimate what it takes, right? Like how many times have we put off working on a project because you think you need 2 or 3 hours in the shop to get it done, but then you do it in 20 minutes and then you're like, oh, geez, I really should have just done that, right? So anyway, I'll stop waxing poetic about vinyl, but the idea is that it's the same sort of thing in my head as it is with the hand tools. So once you get a machine set up close to where you need it to be, you can do all of your tuning with this. And in fact, in antiquity, if you look at old pieces, you'll see that what they've done is they've actually purposefully overcut the shoulder on the inside, the part that's never seen. And that whole gig was so that they were doing furniture in a production environment, but they didn't have any production tools, and so they were doing it this way. So they would purposefully pare back that unseen shoulder so that they knew it wasn't going to get them into trouble. Because you could do the glue up and then all of a sudden you've got a little unsightly gap at the front, and that's because the back one is holding you up. And so they would do things like purposefully do that. And I'm not talking a huge gap. I'm not talking about, 3-4 mil of space. I'm talking about 1 or 2 plane shavings, right? Which will allow you to fit that joint. Same thing as we do, when you're cutting dovetails, and you might put a slight chamfer on the back of the tails just to facilitate everything coming together a little easier, and you're not getting hung up by an errant little piece of wood that's stuck into a corner. So the shoulder plane, one of the common things that we get with the shoulder plane, the comment is well, the blade's too big, right? It's wider than the plane. What happened, right? And the reality is that it kind of needs to be that way because you want to make sure at all times that that corner, that blade, is right up on the side of the plane. Because when you're trimming, if I'm using this as my reference surface, I can't have the blade sticking out because then it's going to hop the plane up, and then now I'm not getting a true reference surface. At the same time, it can't be inside of the corner because then I'm going to create a step as I'm working it. So the easiest thing I find to do is when you're using a plane like this to just lay it on its side, and then I just loosen off the lever cap, then I'll push on the body and then push the blade as well. and then tighten everything up, and now I know that that's resting right on the side of the body, and I'm going to get a nice clean cut. Okay? We have set screws that are on the side of this plane, and they're really designed so that when you pull a blade out for sharpening, you can get it roughly back into the place that it needs to be. But you certainly don't want to run those screws up against the blade, because then you lose your ability to do any adjustment, because everything's pinched really tight. Okay? In this case, this is the 3/4 inch shoulder plane. We have actually 3 different sizes and then another one that's another type. So we have a small plane, which is closer to 1/2 inch, and that's ideal for things like small projects, boxes, small frames, things like that. But I really believe that for most furniture making applications, this is the right size. We also do a large shoulder plane, which is quite a bit wider, and really you only need to get into those if you find yourself doing a lot of things like breadboard ends for large pieces of furniture, or sometimes architectural millwork. If you have to make adjustments to sills and things like that, having a larger plane is helpful. But for the most part, that super large plane is not a good all-arounder because it's quite heavy. It's a giant brick of metal. And so holding it in your hand can be a little bit, it can get a little tiresome. This plane is designed a little bit differently so that you can actually slip your middle finger into the hole that's here, and then you've got a small knob that adjusts to whatever is comfortable for your hand position, and then you can use it in that way. So it's a slightly different grip, right? Some people find that bothersome, myself included, because I have a big hand. And so I find that my hand gets too crinkled up. So then if you just simply remove that knob, now you can grip it just like an everyday shoulder plane with a somewhat all-around kung fu grip, so that it's you get good registration and it's comfortable in the hand. Okay. We also have what's called a bullnose plane, which is a smaller plane that has a removable toe that allows you to work right into a corner. So that's more of a specialty plane, but if you find yourself doing that sort of work, it's really indispensable because it allows you to remove that nose and get right into a corner, somewhat like a chisel plane, except you've got the advantage that the shoulder plane has, which is a surface that is perfectly perpendicular to the sole. So are there any questions about shoulder planes?
The Edward Preston plane.
Yes.
You can remove the nose.
You can do, yep.
But you don't think that's advisable in that case?
Well, you can remove this nose if you like. It's not really designed to happen. But we have a screw here at the top, and then we have a screw here at the front that allows you to open and close the mouth setting, right? But if you're to remove this screw altogether, then this nose piece will just fall away.
Oh, I didn't get it.
And then now you've got, but you're limited, aren't you? Right? Because I can't go into anything deeper than this.
Yeah.
But in a lot of applications, that can work. So I've done this before, taken it off and used it that way for the odd time that I need to get into a stopped situation. But if you find yourself having to do that a lot, it probably makes sense to have the actual plane that does it.
What angle of the blade you're sharpening that to?
Right. So because a shoulder cut is an end grain cut, we have the blade bedded at 12 degrees, and then we recommend using a low angle like 25, maximum 30, which is going to give you an effective cutting angle of around 37 degrees. And then that gives you a nice clean paring cut on the end grain. Yeah.
What blades are in there? 01 or PM V11 or A2?
Well, this one's PM V11. Okay, so is everybody familiar with PM V11? No? Let me talk about that for just a brief second then. So PM V11 is powdered metal, essentially. And so what they've done is this is how it was explained to me in layman's terms, because of course I'm not a metallurgist or an engineer. But essentially what they do is they melt all the constituent metals together, and then they force it through a tiny extruder. And then they blow hot gas across the tiny extruder, and essentially what they're creating is small pieces of powder. And all of those pieces of powder have all of the constituent metals in it. And then what they do is they reform that under high pressure and heat, and that creates a bar stock that is extremely homogeneous. So you have alloys in it that provide you with strength, but they also are really well blended with carbon and all of that, so that it allows you to put a very keen edge onto the tool, but it lasts, in our testing, around 4 times longer than A2 does. So PM V11, PM stands for powdered metal, V stands for Veritas, and 11 is from the movie Spinal Tap, where the amplifier goes to 11. So let it never be said that our president doesn't have a sense of humor. If you've not seen the movie Spinal Tap, I highly suggest that you do. It's a hilarious movie. But the nice thing about PM V11 is the engineers came to me and they said, listen, Vic, we want you to test this steel. It sharpens as keenly as high carbon steel, but it lasts longer than A2. And so I started laughing. And when I started, because I said, sure, boys, you've discovered the silver bullet, have you? And so they gave me the steel, I started using it, and well, what do you know? It really does do what it promises that it would do. To the point where when I was done testing the steel, I tried to go back to 01 and I just couldn't do it because it lasts so much longer. So this jack plane, I used this at the Harrogate show for 3 days straight, and I can still pull a half thou shaving off of a softer piece of wood with it because the blade just lasts longer. So I've gone from having to sharpen my tools once or twice a day at a show environment where I'm constantly demoing these tools to being able to do an entire weekend without sharpening, right? Anybody here like sharpening? Yeah? About the same amount who enjoy sanding, I imagine, right? I mean, it's a necessary evil, isn't it? We have to sharpen. We have to do that in order to get our tools working properly, but at the same time, we don't want to make a hobby out of it, right? And anyway, I won't go into sharpening and the internet.
But PM V11 also is good, particularly at lower angles, I think, so good for the end grain.
Yeah. So because it has those alloys in it, technically PM V11 is also a stainless steel because of the different materials in it. And so even at lower angles, it really can take a beating without failing. Our engineers had all of these setups. They had these pneumatic, it was awesome to watch. I mean, it was the nerdiest thing you've ever seen in your life. But they had devices that would lift a chisel up in the air, like to a certain degree with weight on it, and then a piece of white oak would get fed in, and then it would drop down onto it, and it would take a paring cut, and then it would lift itself up, advance, boom, and they would just make shavings all day long. And they were all gathered around with pens, and it was a lot of fun to watch. But the reality is that we wanted to prove that out. I mean, I can't say, oh yeah, the edge lasts longer, because I use it like this, but nobody knows how hard I'm hitting, nobody knows the timber that I'm using. So we tested it in very difficult woods, like white oak is a good example, because white oak isn't consistent all the way through, is it? It's large pores, and there's a big difference in the hardness between late wood and early wood, and so you're hitting hard, soft, hard, soft, hard, soft, right, which is difficult on an edge tool. So for us, that sort of testing, as much as I teased the engineers about it, was absolutely necessary. And so on average, I think you're going to pay maybe 10 pounds more for a plane that has PM V11 in it as opposed to 01, but believe me, the 10 pounds is completely worth it. I had to start buying blades to replace the ones in my shop, and I bought one a month, right, so Mom didn't notice that I was, I think we know how that works. I would just come in and kind of swish it around in the dust collector a little bit so that it looked like it had been there forever. And then, yeah, that's a good trick. You can take that. Yeah, we're all here for each other, us woodworkers.
I wish you wouldn't give these secrets away.
Oh, well, the real secret is that no matter how cunning we think we are, we really are not pulling the wool, are we? So we think we're so smart. But yeah, so PM V11, you know, especially in this application here where we talked about it being a very low angle, it's really good to have that steel employed because now you're going to get a lot longer out of it. And especially a tool like this. Joinery planes is a big one, I think, because joinery planes require the edge be perpendicular to the sides, right? You look at a plow plane, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and you look at other joinery tools, this geometry is absolutely critical. And so there's no better way to screw that up than having to sharpen more often than you need to, right? And so for me, that PM V11 allowing you to have that extra long life to it, especially a shoulder plane, you pull that out maybe once a week or something if you're making a piece, because you only have to adjust you know, shoulders so often. It's not like a bench plane we're using it every single day. So you could go months without having to sharpen this blade, which is lovely, right? You're not messing about with something that's a little bit more difficult to play with. Okay. So are there any other questions about shoulder planes? No? Like I said, it doesn't matter if you're cutting by hand or if you're cutting with a power tool. I think a shoulder plane is the one joinery tool that every woodworker should have because it allows you so much freedom to be able to just simply get it close and then make some adjustments. I mentioned that I cut my joinery by hand. When I cut my shoulders, what I'll do is I'll use a knife line to establish where my shoulder position has to be. And then I'll saw, you know, 1/2 mil away from that line. And then I'll come out with this afterwards and just pair it so that it's perfect. And then because my parts are marked correctly, I've now started doing the same thing that our predecessors did, which is on the back side, I take an extra pass or two just to relieve that spot, right? So that when I go to assemble, I know I'm going to have a good fit right where I need it, which is the face of the piece. The cat will know, right? But the cat's not going to tell anybody. I usually get in trouble for saying things like that because, like, in some cases we treat the inside surfaces as, sorry?
You haven't got it on straight.
Oh yeah, thank you. This is what happens when I try to talk and do at the same time, see? My wife always laughs at me because she says you're incapable of doing that. What does she know? Oh, this is on YouTube. Love you. Love you, dear.
Can I ask you a stupid question?
No, please do. Uh-huh.
How do you deal with breakout on a shoulder with a shoulder plane?
Right.
With that shoulder plane in particular?
Uh-huh. Yeah, so there's a couple of ways that you can do it. So the real key is a sharp tool and a light cut. Okay, a lot of times we try to take too heavy of a cut, and then that's where you get the breakout that can cause you some trouble. So one good thing to do is to use a shooting board, right? So in the same way that you use a shooting board to correct end grain with a plane, you can also use that same shooting board and that same fence, and you line all of that up onto the fence, and then that way when you pass this across, you've got support ahead of the cut. I know some people will also just simply put a piece of wood in behind, right, and then that will prevent the spelching from happening. And then I've also heard of people using tape, masking tape, although I've not really done that because it just seems like a lot of trouble. Because I use my shooting board in conjunction with this tool, it never really comes as being a problem. Yeah, but that's a good way to stop that from happening. It's a good question. Any other questions about shoulder planes?
How many do you have there? You have 3 basically, a small one, a medium, and then the large?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we also have the bullnose. That's right.
4.
So 4 in total. Yeah. And like I said, this is pretty much, you know, this does about 95% of the work, considering that stats are made up on the spot 67% of the time. But I mean, really, this does do an awful lot of work for me. I only own the one plane because I don't typically work at the smaller scale and I don't typically work at the larger scale. So to me, that really is the best size as far as a good starter location.
I think all 3 of those have got the adjustable mouth, so you can close that down if you want to take some really fine shavings.
Mm-hmm. Yep, they all have adjustable mouths. Including the bullnose plane. The bullnose plane has a very, very small toe on it, but the same screw that allows you to remove that toe piece will allow it to travel back and forth, so that if you want to have a little bit more support on the cut there, you can do that. But really, I mean, with end grain, the critical support, as this gentleman has alluded to, is that it's that back end, right? Because that's where things are going to go wrong if they are going to. Yeah. And you can also use this to tune up rebates, right? If you have a rebate that needs to be increased a little bit, right, you can always drop that in and take one pass. You know, in some cases, if they're cut with a router, you know, we've all heard that noise, you know, that the router makes when it comes off the fence a little bit, that right? And that's when you, oh, whoops. So, because when things go wrong with machines, they go wrong in a hurry. And so, you know, you may have to make a little bit of an adjustment or what have you in order to fix that. So this would work out really well for that. Yeah. Shoulder plane questions anymore? No? Okay, fair enough. If you think of questions later, don't think that, you know, you have to go away not knowing. I mean, I'm here. This is the time to ask. So otherwise, you may end up on the internet asking questions, and then that can go wrong sometimes, can't it?
How much they cost us?
How much?
Would it be the price?
I'll get my
The
laptop.
medium ones, I think, is 160.
160 pounds?
PM V, going up to about 220, I think, for the large one.
Yeah. Yeah, so they're not inexpensive, is what it boils down to.
Only buy one now.
Well, that's right. Well, my father always taught me that when you buy a good tool, you only cry once. Right? When you buy an inexpensive tool, you cry and you cry and you cry. Right? So I always learned that, you know, to buy the best that I can afford. And so in this case here, I will have that tool for my entire life, and anybody who gets those tools after me will have them for their lifetime as well. We've seen that with Stanley and Record. Some of the well-produced stuff, you know, is still in use today, and that's a good thing, right? We've got a lot of things in the world that are planned obsolescence, right? We don't need to do that with our hand tools. It's good to have those to hand off one day. Yeah.
Yeah, so there were 182.
182?
PM V11.
Okay. So there you go, 182. All right.
We'll stop for a cup of tea in about 25 minutes, that's okay?
Yeah. Actually, do you have the Spokeshaves that you said? Yeah, if we can just, I'll do that because that's before I get into the heavy duty stuff, which is gonna, I don't want us to get cut short on that. So we'll do the Spokeshave stuff first and then, and get that all taken care of. So Spokeshaves typically are not used by a flat woodworker. Somebody who's doing furniture making doesn't often have the requirement to sculpt, right? A chair maker, bodgers, that sort of thing, they certainly do have the need to do that. Cheers.
Both are slightly curved.
Oh, okay.
That's an older one and that's a new one. They've changed the design?
Yes, yeah, just slightly, yeah, yeah. So basically all a Spokeshave is a hand plane with a very short sole, and the handles are placed on the side instead of front and back. Okay, so again, the Spokeshave is typically used for chair makers who are creating curved components. As well, if you are working with any curves in your furniture, a Spokeshave can really help you out as far as getting good results. So we sell 3 varieties of this style, right? So this one has a curve to the sole, right? And that allows you to get into areas that are obviously curved, right? How appropriately named is that? And so, yeah, smooth move, Tesolin. So, if you're doing an outside curve, you can get away with using just a flat sole. And in fact, in a lot of cases, you can slip to something like a block plane on the outside. But on the inside, a lot of times you need to have that curve so that you can then follow that curve along, right? And a lot of times you end up working in 2 different directions, don't you? Because the grain changes at the bottom, doesn't it? It goes back up the other way. If you don't know that, you'll learn quickly. Because you only get tarot a few times before you start to realize that there's something going on. The nice thing about our Spokeshaves is that you have adjusters on here. And so that allows you to really dial in the cut so that you're getting exactly the amount of blade that you want. Some planes require, or some Spokeshaves require the use of a hammer tap, which isn't, it isn't difficult to set up, but you need some experience in doing that. Because if you hit it too far, then you've got to back it out and then start again. And then if you've hit it too far, then you have to back it out and start it again. And you can see how aggravating that would get after a little while. So having the adjusters is quite nice. As well, a chair maker in Canada that I've spent some time with, he sets up his Spokeshaves purposefully off-center so that he has just a whisper of a cut on one side and then a heavier cut on the other side. And the point of that is now, because you're working basically on tangent of a curve, you can do heavy cuts with one side and then simply slide the tool over and use the fine side, right? So now, instead of having to, Stanley had made, they had 2 kind of blades and heads that with different settings or what have you. This way here, you can just easily do it with any plane. And then now, with any Spokeshave, and because you have the adjuster, one on the left, one on the right, you can very easily set them to be equal, and then just give this one an extra little bit of adjustment, and now you've got the ability to run it either way on the wood, which to me is when I discovered that, I thought, well, that's just brilliant, right? Because I would have instinctively set it up for a heavy cut, used it, and then, oh, I need to do a fine cut, and then backed it off, and then, you'd be playing with these all day long, and so this is just a brilliant way to do it. So we also have the flat one, which I don't have here with me, but the idea there is that if you're doing small sections where it starts to curve right on the outside, you can easily use that. The nice thing about a Spokeshave is that because the sole is so small, you can really finesse a small area with it, right? As opposed to a hand plane, which even the smallest hand plane, you know, in comparison, you know, sole length, there's quite a difference there. So this just allows you to be a little bit more versatile in the sense that you can get into small spots and play with it and sort it out. Same thing if you were trying to put a chamfer on a curved piece, right? This allows you to simply follow that chamfer and not worry about having to try to balance a relatively large plane on such a small surface, right? We also have one that is concave, which has like an actual cutout in it, and that was designed for spoke work, so that you could, back in the day when we made spokes out of wood, it had a preset curve on it, and then that allowed you to really quickly round something over. I have one in my shop because sometimes, you know, to have this straight and then start to transform into a curve here, right? I can easily start that process where it just starts to come in on the sides, and then by the time it gets over here, it's a full round over. So you can really do some cool effects with it, especially if, you know, maybe this is part of joinery or something. Maybe this is sitting on a cabinet side, right? This is a leg sitting on a cabinet, and you don't want it to just be straight all the way to the floor. So you can do this tapered round over very easily with a tool like that, where it touches the cabinet is still straight, and then it starts to transform into a round, right? So you don't have, everything doesn't have to be straight, flat, and square, right? Despite what IKEA may tell us, right? Not that there's anything wrong with IKEA. I just sent my daughter to uni, and believe me, we had a van load of IKEA that went with it because we know what's going to happen to that furniture. I'll wait until she settles down to start furnishing her home. I'm about 80% there with my own personal home with my own furniture in it. So by the time I get done with that, once she's settled down, then we'll give her some nice furniture, but she can do the Swedish products for a little while. But the nice thing about adding curves to your work is that that's typically not what a company can do, a mass production company. And that's what makes these tools kind of unique in the sense that if you can think about it, you can actually create it, right? And again, the hand tool side of it makes it easy. If you were to try to set up a router or a power tool to do some, you know, crazy organic shape, I mean, you'd be designing jigs, you'd spend a week making jigs and then, you know, 20 seconds making the cut, right? Which I'm sad to say I've done, right? Whereas if I can just draw the curve with a pencil, I can grab one of these and work to that line. Now, if I'm going to make 50 of them, I have to come up with another process, right? But I think the majority of us don't make 50 of anything, right? I'm not a production woodworker. I think most hobbyists are not production woodworkers. And so doing 4 legs by hand with a Spokeshave is totally doable. Especially considering that the legs aren't right beside each other, are they? Right? So if one is a little bit different than the other, that's not the end of the world, right? It's not cause for alarm. We also have a low angle Spokeshave. And the low angle Spokeshave looks an awful lot like the old style of Spokeshave. So if you recall the old wooden Spokeshaves that basically had a blade with 2 upward bent tangs that got driven up into the body, right? That's how the adjustment was made, and it was a very low angle cut. So instead of the shaving coming out of the mouth like this, the shaving comes out the back of the Spokeshave. And so that particular tool we've done as well, and we've done it with a very lightweight material. It's a type of aluminum, and so the tool is super light, and because it's end grain, you could round over, or pardon me, because it's low angle, you can round over an end grain bit and you'll get beautiful paring cuts with it, as opposed to, you know, trying to use a plane that's got a more steep angle. I would like to say also that if you have children or grandchildren that you'd like to get into woodworking, I think the best tool to get them doing that is a Spokeshave. Okay, it's very difficult to hurt yourself with a Spokeshave, although if you try hard enough you can, right? I'm running my thumb across this right now, and it's Peter's tool, so I'm assuming it's sharp. It's blunt, is it?
The students, you see, they keep
Very good. Oh, all the students just rose up there, didn't they? Yeah. Ooh, this is where it goes horribly wrong. We'll get great views on the internet, though, won't we? So you've got just a small amount of blade protruding, right? And if you take a 2x4 or some just whatever wood, clamp it to the end of the bench and give a child one of these, show them what it does, and they will spend hours just making shavings, right? And at first they'll make shavings, but then their minds will start to get creative and they'll start making stuff. If it's a boy, it's a sword, right? Because that's what boys make, is swords. But they'll start to make, it's like when you look in the sky and you see a cloud and you see an object in the cloud. Kids see that. Kids see it in the wood and they start removing material and they're like, well, look, it's a unicorn. And you're looking at it and you're going, right, it certainly is. But you know, the reality is that that's encouraging their creativity and they're working with their hands, which is something that we don't do a lot with kids anymore, do we? Right? They're very good at operating one of these things, right? But, you know, maybe we could get like a Spokeshave app where you... It's a lovely way to spend time with kids in the shop, right? So that if you're working on a project, they can be working on their own project. That and a hammer and a bucket full of nails and a 2x4, right? They just for days. Because it takes an hour for a child to drive a nail into a piece of wood, doesn't it? Right? And it's been cherry kissed all the way around the nail 600 times, but they're having a blast doing it. But that's important skills that we don't learn anymore. I mean, how many of us remember working in the shop with a parent or a grandparent and learning how to fix things and things like that? This is one of those steps. And this is one of those tools that if you're looking to spend quality time with a child in a shop, it's a safe way to do it, right? You wouldn't have them on that Felder saw, right? Or at least you would hope not anyway. Although they are small enough, I suppose you could sit them on top and have them hold something for you as it goes. Anyway, probably, yeah, don't do that to your children. Geez, we'll get all kinds of comments now, won't we? We run.
Sharpening Vics are quite small to hold, aren't they?
Yes, they are. Yeah. You don't need to sharpen up your children. They're much sharper than you give them credit for, believe me. Yeah, so these are smaller blades to hang on to. And so a lot of times it requires a little bit of special care. So we sell a device that allows you, basically allows you to extend the length of the blade itself, and then that gives you some extra purchase that you can work with. So I usually, oh geez, Peter, you weren't kidding, eh?
Yeah. I can't find my small blade holder from all the usual.
So there's a couple of different ways you can do it. You can use the blade holder, which will hold it in place, and that will just give you extra length. Oh, Peter's gonna, yeah. So this is the device here, and so basically what you do is it's magnetic and it grabs onto the blade, right? And now it's also got a dovetail here on the side, and then what that does is it prevents that from popping out. And then you can use that on a grinder. You can use, I believe, use this on Tormek. Yeah. So any sort of a hollow grind. And then personally, what I like to do is I like to put a hollow grind on these particular tools. And then when I go to sharpen it, all I have to do is put the heel down and the toe down. And then now I've got great registration. In fact, I can feel that this tool has that. And then run it across the stone, right? And it's very easy to do it by hand. The other way you can do it is with a jig of some sort, depending on what you prefer to use. But the idea here is that you really have good positive control over it, and it makes it a lot easier. You can also do it with this in place if you like having something into the palm of your hand. Okay, now you can hand sharpen that without much difficulty.
I managed to get it into the Mark II jig as well.
Oh, great.
In the instructions, you've got to play with the angles a bit, but
Yep.
you can get it in there into the blade holder.
That's right.
Just look at what the angle is on the end.
That's right.
Using the set.
Yeah, you can use the Mark II honing guide.
On probably left hand. Oh, you're there.
Right? You can use it, but the numbers, you can't use the numbers that come with it because this offsets the blade. And so, as Peter suggested, you would just put it onto its side and just kind of look to see where you're at. As well, if you use a bit of felt tip marker on the edge and give it one pull back on a coarser stone, maybe 1000 grit, you'll see right away where you're cutting and whether or not you have to increase or decrease the angle in order to get it where it's at. So smaller blades. This is also very handy for the low angle spoke shave that I spoke about, because that blade is really from tip to back is only about that wide. And so this really does a nice job at holding on to that, because that's a very delicate blade to try to sharpen by hand. Yeah. So, and then you can, with a jig, you can put a micro bevel on if you wish, or you can do the heel and toe method, which is where you're riding both sides. The wood won't know what you've done, right? So whether it's a micro bevel or not, it really doesn't matter. There's an awful lot of information available on the internet about sharpening and the role of a micro bevel. In reality, the micro bevel is really there to speed up your sharpening process. I don't feel that it bolsters the edge at all. I don't, it really, what it does is it allows you to polish just the leading edge, which in the case of this blade is how it's been done. And instead of having to polish the whole thing, now you're just polishing that leading edge. And that really speeds up your sharpening regime. Right? The Japanese, they do the whole bevel, but the part that is forgotten about with the Japanese is that they have a thin piece of high quality tool steel that's been forge welded to a piece of softer steel. And so they can polish the whole thing because it takes no time to do that. Right? For us, the Western side, we use big thick chunks of tool steel, and so that requires us to work just on the edge as opposed to polishing the whole thing. Can you polish the whole thing? Absolutely. There's no reason why you can't do that, right? There is no other advantage to the micro bevel other than speed, okay? Despite what you may have read, heard, seen. It just doesn't, it's not required. So it just speeds you up. So are there any questions on spoke shaves?
Do you tend to work with a forward stroke or a put-in stroke?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, I work with it however the work dictates. You can push, you can pull. You can push and pull planes, right? Sometimes if I notice there's a bit of grain direction going the other, I'm a lazy woodworker, is what it really boils down to. And instead of taking the board and if it's in a vise and flipping it, I'll just flip my plane and pull it towards me, and then I'll address that little bit of tear out. With a spoke shave, it's really important to be versatile because you are working on different angles and different shapes. So the grain direction is going to change quite a bit on you when you're using one of these tools. So it's important that if you're coming through here and then all of a sudden it comes up this way, that you flip it and then push towards, right? Whenever you're working into a curve, the grain is always downhill until about the bottom, and then it starts to go the other way. So if I'm working this way, then I can just flip it and use it this way. Right? So that's the beauty of this tool, is that it's very easy to switch directions with it. And you'll learn more about grain direction by using one of these tools than you will with anything else. I can talk till I'm blue in the face about grain direction and how you can recognize which way it's going, or we could just bandsaw a curved bit on an edge of a board and let you work at it with this. And you'll be going along, and then all of a sudden you'll hear a crunch, and you're like, ooh, oh, that's better, right? Spend 20 minutes doing that, and I could talk to you for 2 hours about grain direction, and you'd get more out of this than you would out of listening to me drone on, right? So that's another good reason that this tool is helpful. And kids figure it out right away, right? You don't have to, don't feel that you have to helicopter these kids, right, when they're using one of these tools. They're going to go against the grain, and it's going to be harder for them to push, and then they're like, oh, well, that didn't work. I'm going to go this way. Like, they're brilliant, right? They have no conception of, I'm doing it wrong. They just notice they're not getting as good results, and then they automatically will go, oh, I'll try this way. Oh, that's better. And it makes sense in their head. It's just us adults that, are a little, my dad was of Italian descent, and he would always say testa dura, hard head, right? So kids don't have that problem. It's just us that has that problem. We also make a quite a bit larger Spokeshave with a blade about that wide on it, and the whole thing is about this wide, and that's designed for paddle making. So canoeing is a huge thing in North America. I'm not sure if you do a lot of canoeing over here, but so making canoe paddles is a big deal. We have a huge tradition in Canada, especially among our native community, where they use axes and knives and tools, very crude tools, to make beautiful paddles. And so it's almost a rite of passage that if you do a lot of canoeing, to make your own paddle, right? Because paddles are a very personal thing. They have a very personal feel to them, and being able to make your own is lovely. And so we made a much bigger Spokeshave so that when you get into the bottom of the paddle, where the blade is, right, it's a much larger piece, and so you can remove material quite easily with this big Spokeshave. And it allows you to go from a round, right, which the shaft of the paddle, and then it starts to flatten out into so now you can make a beautiful transition there, and make a nice paddle. So I can't imagine what else you would use such a large Spokeshave for, other than bragging. Look at the size of this, right? But other than that, I mean, that's what we use it for in Canada. But I don't even know. Do you bring the large ones in, Clive?
Yeah.
You do? Yeah? Yeah. Okay.
We had a barrel maker make it using them.
A which?
Barrel maker.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they were using them quite often.
Oh, excellent. Okay, well, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, because it's the same kind of size of material that you're working with, isn't it? Yeah. So, so are there any other questions about Spokeshaves? Yes, sir.
Presumably they get PM V11 blades as well.
Yes.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And again, that's lovely, because then you're not sharpening as often, right? Yeah. The Spokeshave really is. It's not a terribly expensive tool, but it really can teach you a lot about woodworking when you do that sort of a sculptural thing. Some people who are into period furniture, where you're doing cabriole legs and things like that, I mean, it's an indispensable tool for that. So as well, just taking the squareness out of your work, right? Allowing you to add some sculptural ideas. I was in Australia, and I saw a wonderful hall table where the legs came down and then they flared out at the bottom to look like a high heel shoe. I mean, it's not something you expect on a piece of furniture, is it? But it had this beautiful transition, and then it was I couldn't wear them. They were for a whole bunch of reasons, but they were gorgeous. And I mean, there's a whimsical way, right, to add something to your furniture, and I guarantee that furniture maker didn't do some crazy jig to create that. They would have cut it roughly out and then finessed it with a Spokeshave, and then maybe finished off with rasps and that sort of thing in order to give it that really nice shape. But I mean, the sky's the limit when you start talking about curves, because anything that you can imagine, you can do. right? Some people have the ability to look at a piece of wood and see what's in it. I remember one time I sat listening to a conversation that Chris Pye had, the carver, and he's from over here. And he has these whimsical little things, like he does a headboard and then there's like a little mouse hidden like in a little area, and it's like, I'm like, how do you design your pieces? And he says, well, I don't really. He said, I look at the timber, and he said, and it's all in there. I just need to remove the bits that are in the way. Like that is completely not helpful. Right? But I've started to realize with more and more experience doing curved work, that's really the best way to describe it, is that you just picture it there and then just remove the parts that aren't that detail. And then away you go. So it's probably, you're finding that as helpful as I did, I can see. But it really is true. Any other questions about Spokeshaves? Okay, brilliant tool, great for kids, great for doing green woodworking, great for doing chair making, or any sort of sculptural sort of thing. They're a wonderful little tool. You can push, you can pull, you can palm them with one hand, right, and work. Right? There's all kinds of ways to use these. There's not an incorrect way to use them, and you know, you can do a lot of interesting things with them. Rehandling axes, rehandling hammers, right? Like when you break a hammer handle, you don't have to throw it away, right? You can get yourself a bit of ash or a bit of hickory, and make your own hammer handle, which is fantastic because now it fits your hand, right? Instead of just throwing it away, adding it to the landfill like everything else. Okay. So I think, Peter, what we'll do is we'll take a break.
Coffee, I think,
yeah, we'll have tea and coffee, and then we'll come back and we're going to talk about one of my favorite hand tools, which is router planes. And then we're going to also talk about how to properly set up and use a scraping plane. Okay?